support.
The chief credit in smashing the enemy's spearhead, however, must go to the rocket-firing Typhoon aircraft of the 2nd Tactical Air Force. The result of the strafing was that the enemy attack was effectively brought to a halt and a threat was turned into a great victory.
The Hurricane was the most successful aircraft in the Battle of Britain. But by 1941, Germany had made significant technical advances, and both the Hurricane and the Spitfire were now outclassed. Nicknamed the Butcher Bird, the Focke-Wulf 190 was superior in speed, maneuverability, and firepower. And by the autumn of 1941, the RAF were suffering significant losses. Britain was at risk of losing the air superiority it had fought so hard for the previous year. Unable to catch the 190 on its penetrating raids, the battle for the air was tipping the wrong way. Britain needed a new hero. In 1937, even before the production of the Hurricane got underway, the designer Sidney Cam had started work on its successor, the hugely ambitious Hawker Typhoon. But 4 years on, partly due to the decision to concentrate resources on the production of other aircraft, the Typhoon was still a long way from being operationally ready when the first were delivered in late 1941. This haste was costly, with several aircraft being lost, and the Typhoon project was almost abandoned. But despite airframe, engine, and carbon monoxide issues, they continued developing the aircraft throughout 1942 until most of the problems with the advanced technology had been resolved. In the period between October 1942 and July 1943, the Typhoon halted the Focke-Wulf raids, shooting down over a score of 190s along with several other aircraft. The Typhoon had arrived, and the kills were mounting. By mid-1943, the Spitfire had evolved into what many believed to be the best pure fighter aircraft of the Second World War. But at low level, the Typhoon had also evolved into a new role, a role that would cement its place in history as one of the most successful aircraft of the Second World War, a role that was to make the Typhoon a D-Day legend. The Typhoon showed an ability for ground attack when it was first fitted with bombs. But it wasn't until September 1943 that the aircraft reached full potential, when 60-pound RB3 rockets were fitted. With a punch the equivalent of a destroyer broadside, the psychological impact of the Typhoon was devastating.
We had 4 Tiger tanks and 3 Panther tanks. We were convinced that we would gain another victory here, that we would smash the enemy forces. But then Typhoons dropped these rockets on our tanks and shot all 7 to bits. And we cried. We would see 2 black dots in the sky, and that always meant rockets. Then the rockets would hit the tanks, which would burn.
By the end of that year, over 200 rocket-equipped Typhoons were the primary ground attack capability of the newly formed 2nd Tactical Air Force. And by June 1944, in preparation for the Normandy landings, the Typhoon proved itself to be the most effective tactical strike aircraft, hitting communication and transport targets deep into northwest Europe. But on D-Day itself, the Typhoons were the cutting edge of a new tactic, forward air control. Fitted with the same VHF radios as the tanks, rocket-equipped Typhoons queued like cabs at the edge of the battle, ready to strike targets as directed by troops on the ground. Although precise numbers of ground kills are lost in the fog of war, both the physical and psychological impact of the hard-hitting Hawker Typhoon is undisputed. And in the closing stages of the biggest and bloodiest conflict the world has ever known, Sidney Cam's vision of a hero became a legend. The Hawker Typhoon wrote the blueprint for a long line of fighter bombers that followed, from the Typhoon II that became the Tempest right up to its Eurofighter namesake of today. 3,317 Hawker Typhoons were built, but the last one flew in 1946. We all owe a debt to this difficult child that was born and grew up so quickly in the heat of battle. And we say thank you to the thousands of people that made the Typhoon possible. But for the 666 Typhoon pilots that died, we remember you, and we honor all of you in this project.
Spitfires are fantastic, Hurricanes are fantastic, Mustangs are fantastic, but the Typhoon is missing. And because it's missing, its story is missing and it's not told. And that's what we're trying to do with this project. What you can see here and what we've got exhibited today is probably half of the parts that make up the project. There's a lot more that it just wasn't possible to lay out. So RB396 is the donor aircraft. It's what gives this project its identity. In the eyes of CAA, it is a provable aircraft. It's not 100% of that aircraft, of course, but it is a provable aircraft so that when it's finished, it can carry that serial number and you can point at that aircraft and say, that is RB396. That was built at the end of 1944, delivered by a Polish ATA pilot, Anna Leska. It was then delivered over to the continent early 1945, I think the 6th or 7th of January, but the records are a little bit sketchy there. And then it flew with the squadron, 174 squadron, until the 1st of April 1945, so a month before the end of the war. Its main pilot was a Canadian guy called Frank Johnson. We've seen his logbooks, actually spoke to him before he passed away a few years ago. And we found out in that conversation that he had his then partner's name, Sheila, painted on the port cowling, which is really nice. We wouldn't have known that otherwise. On the 28th of March, he flew it in the morning, and then a new pilot to the squadron, a guy called Sidney Russell Smith, nicknamed Junior because he looked about 12, flew it in the afternoon. And he got hit by flak. That was one of 18 times that the aircraft was hit by flak, enough to warrant repairs. So that caused the aircraft to be grounded for a couple of days. So on the 30th of March, Frank Johnson then didn't have an aeroplane, so he flew another aircraft, got shot down, hit by flak, shot down, forced landed, became a prisoner until the end of the war. Luckily for him, he only had a month to wait. In that time, Sydney had been posted to 184 Squadron, which actually is the squadron my grandfather was attached to. And then, so the pilot on the 1st of April was a guy called Chris House. It's the one and only time that he flew the aircraft. He got hit by flak, so much so that he was forced down. He forced landed in a field near Denenkamp in the Netherlands. His squadron mates thought he was a prisoner. They saw him land, but they didn't see him come back to base, so they assumed he was captured. He turned up 4 days later on a bicycle that he'd borrowed from a local farmer. And that's sort of the end of RB396's story for about 70 years, really. It was recovered from the battlefield at the end of the war. The rear fuselage section is the main surviving section. That is complete. That was recovered, sold for scrap. It was sold to a chemical merchant. They never used it. They just sort of laid around, and it ended up passing through various museums until it was purchased by the collector I spoke about, who was collecting Typhoon parts from here, there and everywhere, really just as a personal hobby. And he brought it back to the UK. And then a few years later, we spoke. The charity was formed around that section. It's a provable history. It is RB396. The rear fuselage is the first section undergoing work to be rebuilt, and it is due to be finished at the end of this year, 2023. And when that's finished, that will be the first section of an airworthy Typhoon built anywhere in the world since World War II.
When it came here, it'll be 2 years this summer. I had 3 to 4 months dismantling structure to see what parts we'd got before we could then start manufacturing. We had a lot of drawings, Parts we haven't got drawings for, we've got good patterns so we can get the drawings done. And it was a process then of obtaining the tubing and getting parts manufactured. Yeah, the Hawker Typhoon is a different kettle of fish for us in the way that the construction of the fuselage, it's a heavy old aeroplane, big engine at the front, and yeah, it will be exciting to work on.
So in 2016, Cranfield University actually gifted us this engine. So the Napier Sabre engine is incredibly rare, and this engine is widely regarded as the best contender for a return to flight project. It's factory inhibited, so it's had the correct fluids put in, it's been sealed to the elements, it's effectively been in store inside for 70, 80 years. So when we take that apart, it's very likely to be an absolute goldmine. The Napier Sabre is an H24. So imagine a capital H on its side. You've got rows of 6 cylinders, horizontally opposed, feeding into 2 crankshafts, 4-bladed propeller. The book figure was 2,200 horsepower. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people who know what they're talking about, considerably more than me, say, look, in the book, the Napier book in 1940, this is what it said. And they knew full well that our friends over the channel had a copy of that book. So they didn't want to give away all the secrets. They were tested later in the war up to and in excess of 4,500 horsepower without much modification. So actually, you probably, certainly 2,500 horsepower, maybe 3,000. No one really knows. An absolute monster of an engine.
It was a very, very pleasant sounding engine altogether. It's quite smooth running and quite a good roar to it when you opened up the throttle and get full power. And we didn't always use full power for takeoff. Sort of, if we had reasonable runway, we'd only use partial power for takeoff. It was quite enough, unless we had a full load of bombs or something on board.
Whatever you say about it, you couldn't say the Typhoon was good looking, could you? It was a lumpy old hunk of a thing.
But it was a delight to fly, and I enjoyed it.
It was an easy airplane to fly, really. It was very stable.
I found the controls very evenly balanced.
The Typhoon was a good stable gun platform, but it was heavy on the controls. I mean, you needed strength to go into a tight turn.
We were just employed on a ground attack and also bombing the railway lines through Holland, where the Germans were taking up the V1 and V2, all of those up to the Dutch coast to fire them across the channel to London.
2 aircraft would take off and do what they called a rhubarb. It was a code name for an operation where you planned a route which took you in a more or less circular route round the territory, and you shot up anything that appeared on the way. And there were quite a few of these done, and we did lose people while they were doing it. Low-level attacks weren't really the safest thing. Low level, we used to carry 2 250-pound bombs, one under either wing. For the dive bombing, we used to have 500-pound bombs.
The Typhoon very quickly built up to over 500 miles an hour. The limiting speed, I think, was 527, above which we were not supposed to go, although quite frequently in a dive on a target, I saw my airspeed indicator was indicating about 550 miles an hour. But, the aeroplane seemed to stand it, so I didn't worry. The Germans had 4 Ehrlichen 20mm cannon grouped in a turret, and there was a pretty formidable anti-aircraft fire from that. All of the early operations were faced with that return fire. Of course, we had 4 20mm cannon in the wings, so we retaliated.
And I didn't really think about the dangers, I just did the job.
Oh, I'd love to see it and hear it. Yes. Well, in fact, I'd love to fly it, but I don't suppose they'll let me do that.
The Hawker Typhoon was really the first battlefield air interdictor. It was the first aeroplane that could go behind enemy lines and disrupt the lines of communication, which is a role that is now starting to come back into favour.
It played an incredibly important part in the Second World War, which most people just don't know about. The Battle of Britain was primarily fought by Spitfires and Hurricanes, and they rightly received a massive amount of recognition, but Typhoons received almost no recognition in comparison, and it was actually a war-changing aeroplane.
For me, it's really important. I've been a ground attack pilot in the Royal Air Force, and so ground attack to me is how you deliver air power.
Post the D-Day landings, the Typhoon played a massive role in the air-to-ground role, supporting the Allied forces.
But this was the lead element for that. This is what started the whole of the role. A machine that is such a monster to fly, but such an effective combat aeroplane.
A very important aeroplane, and very sad that it's, there weren't any kept after the Second World War.
The fighting spirit that the Typhoon brought and the Typhoon pilots brought is as clear to us today as it was then.
When you look at the bits and pieces that are here today in this hangar, a bit like a jigsaw. Well, jigsaw is a little bit of a metaphor for the Typhoon because it's a missing piece of the jigsaw.
Whilst there are lots of Spitfires and Hurricanes and pretty much every other World War II airplane, there's no flying Typhoon, and there needs to be one.
The Hawker Typhoon's why you guys are here today, and as I said, I'm very grateful for you to be here. Pure and simple, we need your support. The Typhoon was an incredibly important aircraft in the Second World War. It first flew in 1940, before the Battle of Britain. And at that time, it had over 1,000 horsepower more and was 100 miles per hour faster than the frontline Spitfires and Hurricanes of the time. So an incredible technological leap. They suffered initially from a few teething problems brought about mainly by that huge technological leap. They were saved from being withdrawn because at the time they were the only aircraft that could catch the new Focke-Wulf 190, the only one that could get anywhere near it. The Spitfire Mark V couldn't get anywhere near it. And they were countering the hit and run raids on the south coast. They went on to become the most successful ground attack aircraft of the war, bar none. Historians have credited the aircraft with shortening the war. Allied and German generals have credited the Typhoon with the reason that the Allies were able to win the Battle of Normandy. And if it wasn't for the Typhoon, D-Day perhaps wouldn't have happened when it did. But low-level ground attack flying through walls of light flak, which is anything but light, against heavily defended targets was incredibly dangerous work. So dangerous, in fact, that 56% of the pilots that did it were killed. 666 pilots killed. So the men knew this, and they still went. They went day in, day out, sometimes 5 or 6 times a day. Men like Bernard, who flew 71 combat operations in the Typhoon, and all he has to say about it is, I was just doing my job. Our intention with this project is to build the memorial that these brave crews deserve. When it flies, and it will, it'll fly in the memory of everyone who played a part in the Typhoon and its story. This aircraft will tell their story, and it will ensure that it's rewritten into the history books, because it has largely been forgotten. And to do this, we need your support. So the rear fuselage was chosen as the first section to be rebuilt because it's our identity. It's the section that makes this aircraft RB396. It carries those markings from the war. Geek fact, it's actually the side of the fuselage, one side is the only example of 2nd Tactical Air Force paint known to exist anywhere in the world. You'll notice a large gap in the Typhoon. That section is the section that's being rebuilt. The picture board over there, the timeline of the rear fuselage, the reason it can't be here today is because it is tantalizingly close to being finished. How quickly, of course, that happens depends on how much support we can garner, but it will be complete this year. When it is, that will be the first section of an airworthy Typhoon that's been built anywhere in the world since the Second World War. So that's quite a significant step. Very grateful to have had over the years the support of a number of fantastic, very generous organisations. Our first major boost actually was the engine, the one exhibited on the aircraft over there. In November 2016, that engine was gifted to us from Cranfield University. And subsequently, since then, we've had major support from John Romain and co at the Aircraft Restoration Company. Incredibly grateful. But today, part of this event is to announce future partnerships and collaborations, which we've been working on and we are always working on. One of those is Airfix. You can see over in the back corner there, the guys who come down there are an official brand partner now. We're going to be sharing information. They're going to be following the rebuild. And also for the modelers out there, and I know there are many following this project, they're going to be releasing a special RB396 edition Airfix kit in the not too distant future. So it's really great to have them on board. And we've been supported over the years by a number of individuals as well that have really helped out. So our patron, Cliff Spink, very delighted to have welcomed Cliff on board in 2020. Almost certainly you will all know who Cliff is, retired Air Marshal, extremely experienced pilot, person, and Warbird pilot as well. I'm very grateful to Cliff. And today, very grateful to Mark Greenfield, CEO of Ultimate High down at Goodwood, for stepping up and becoming our 4th ambassador. So delighted to announce that today. And I thank him and everyone for their support. So to see these companies and individuals coming on board, lending their name to us, supporting us to get to where we need to be is a real boost. And I think just serves to highlight how much confidence there is out there now growing in this project. As we're starting, it really feels like we're really starting to build momentum. And thinking of the future, today we're joined by a couple of representatives and sort of friends of mine as well from 3 Squadron. They're flying the Eurofighter Typhoon today. And also we're delighted to be joined by this year's and next year's Eurofighter Typhoon display pilots. From 29 Squadron. So I think you can see now that this is not really a dream anymore, this project. We're making it a reality. This could be completed and flying in 4 to 5 years. And when it is, men like Bernard will finally have the memorial that they deserve. So thank you very much. One thing we were doing, which I will just touch upon, and it was going to be a surprise for Bernard, who is 101 in 5 days' time. So I think that's worthy of a little round. Bernard flew the Typhoon, as I said, 71 combat operations. He also flew the Hurricane in training prior to that. But what we were going to do and what we have arranged for Bernard is to fly in the Hurricane once more, thanks to Hurricane Heritage. In that Hurricane there, which is quite aptly marked in 174 Squadron colours, are Typhoon's Squadron colours. But we're going to send Bernard up, all being well, in the Hurricane. We believe that is almost certainly a world record for the oldest person to fly, no disrespect, Bernard, the oldest person to fly in a Hurricane at 100 and 360 days old. And the reason for that is to say thank you to Bernard for his support of our project and to wish you a very happy 101st birthday by flying in a Hawk Hurricane.
In a world where history often fades into the background, we have the unique opportunity to bring a piece of our collective past back to life. The Hawker Typhoon. This legendary aircraft, a symbol of courage and innovation, played a pivotal role in securing freedom during World War II. Today, we're reaching out to you to help us preserve and honor this iconic warbird. By supporting our charity, you're not only contributing to the restoration of the Hawker Typhoon, but also ensuring that its legacy lives on. Your generosity will enable us to educate future generations about the immense sacrifices made by the brave pilots who flew this remarkable aircraft and the skilled engineers who designed it. As the mighty Typhoon takes to the skies once more, it'll serve as a living monument to the past and a beacon of hope for the future. Join us in our mission to let the Hawker Typhoon fly again and become part of a movement that safeguards our shared history, fosters understanding, and inspires generations to come.